we were told that Prime Minister Modi had conveyed India's concerns about the activities of the pro-Khalistan groups in Canada, and there were very strong statements. And I remember out of the 15 or 16 bilateral meetings that the Indian Prime Minister had with the visiting Prime Ministers and Presidents, this was the most frosty one. Remaining others were very positive. This was the only one where there was sort of sharpness that was seen in the readout. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, he made an explosive allegation in the Canadian Parliament, saying that over the last few weeks, Canadian security agencies, security forces, they have been investigating credible allegations of a potential link between agents of Government of India and killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, who is a Canadian citizen. Now, Hardeep Singh Nijjar was a pro-Khalistan leader based out of Canada. He migrated from India to Canada many years ago and became a citizen there. And he had been under the NIA's, India's national investigative agencies, had declared him a terrorist, and there were charges against him in India. And he was killed in June this year in a Gurdwara, near Gurdwara in Canada. Now what happened was, there have been investigations going on. They have not caught anyone so far, the Canadian police, but this allegation came completely sort of surprised, at least to the public, to the world. Canadian Prime Minister said that he had raised this issue with the Indian Prime Minister, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, on the sidelines of the G20 summit when they met in September 9th and 10th. Around that time they met, they had a bilateral meeting. At that point of time, we were told that Prime Minister Modi had conveyed India's concerns about the activities of the pro-Khalistan groups in Canada, and there were very strong statements. And I remember out of the 15 or 16 bilateral meetings that the Indian Prime Minister had with the visiting Prime Ministers and Presidents, this was the most frosty one. Remaining others were very positive. This was the only one where there was sort of sharpness that was seen in the readout. The Canadian readout at that point of time did not mention anything about this particular allegation. Now, but when he made this public, after that, obviously, Indian side reacted very strongly. So they called it motivated, they called it's an absurd allegation, and said that Canada has been giving support, or has not been acting against the pro-Khalistan groups, and it expects Canada to take action against such groups and such individuals. So that was the sort of pushback. Following that, they also Canada first expelled a diplomat who they said that was heading the intelligence division or section at the High Commission, at the Indian High Commission in Ottawa. India did a reciprocal move, or tit for tat response, but India also expelled a Canadian diplomat who is also said to be head of the intelligence division here in New Delhi. After this tit for tat action of expulsion of diplomats, the Indian side has issued a travel advisory for Indian citizens visiting Canada. So this basically means Indians who are traveling to Canada, they should exercise caution, they should not go, and all of that. Now there are 2 million, almost 2 million Indian diaspora. There are almost 300,000 students who study there in Canada, and about another 4 lakh people who live and work there from India. So it's a large number. So these people have genuine, compelling reasons to visit. So such advisories have only advisory value. They're not binding. But yeah, Indian government has in mind, keeping in mind the the security environment where pro Khalistan groups have sort of called for violence against Indian community. All of those issues have also come out, and we can talk about that. And also, it has issued threats against Indian diplomats. So, because of the security situation, Indian government issued a travel advisory. That was the first step. Then they have suspended the visa services of Indians traveling to, visa services of Canadians wanting to come to India. Now that could be a significant number, because some Canadian passport holders, many of them are of Indian origin, and they want to come here, but they usually have a visa, long-term visa, or a OCI card, which is an overseas citizen of India card, which allows them to travel to India easily. It looks like a passport, but it's basically a visa valid for 5 years to 10 years, that kind of a card. So they can travel, but people who want a visa now, they cannot get a visa for whatever, for indefinite period. This would affect Canadian tourists, Canadian business travelers, also kind of any person who wants to come here to study, which is, Canadian students in India is a very small number, but tourists and business travelers could be a significant amount. So that is the second step it was taken. And third thing that India has done is it has asked the Canadian government to reduce its diplomatic staff based in India, saying that there are many more Canadian diplomats in India than there are Indian diplomats in Canada. So India has actually just one high commission and 2 consulates in two provinces, 2 cities, whereas Canada has the high commission, 3 consulates, and about 8 trade services offices. So it's a large establishment. They operate in India. So India has said that you have to bring parity in diplomatic staff. So you have to match the Indian strength that is present in Canada. So that basically again would mean that reduction of Canadian staff, diplomats have to go back now. So these are the measures that have been taken so far in response to this allegation. Now, so far there has been no evidence that has been shared by the Canadian government with the Indian authorities. At least that's what we have been told so far. And the Trudeau government Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau himself has sought India's cooperation in the investigation into the matter, and has sort of, and it's a very serious charge of extrajudicial killing by Indian government agents in a foreign soil on a foreign citizen. So India sort of has so far. Initially, it did not mention anything about cooperating in the investigation, but now it has said that if there is any specific information that is provided to the Indian government, then it will look into it. So that is where right now the issue stands between India and Canada. There was a lot of people who moved from Punjab to Canada at that point of time, for fear of retribution or whatever. They're fearing for the safety or their own reasons. There are also economic reasons where people moved. Actually, till the 60s, the movement from India to Canada was very little. They were like, I remember I was looking at the figures before, in 1901, the number of Indians who moved from India to Canada was less than 100. It moved gradually to the 60s. I think it was there about 60,000 people moving from India to Canada. Like 80s, 70s it actually picked up, 70s, 80s it picked up, and then it went to lax. So at that point of time, there were a lot of people with pro-Khalistan leanings who moved from India to Canada. If you remember, there was a bombing, Kanishka bombing, known as Kanishka bombing, where Air India, a flight which was, which had more than 300 people, 329 if I remember correctly, people, most of them Canadian citizens. It sort of blown up in mid-air, and the responsibility was claimed by Babbar Khalsa International, which was a pro-Khalistan group, the terrorist group. So that was a big sort of challenge that took place. But Khalistan problem actually took lives of Canadian citizens, also some Indians. It happened in June 85, and it was a major incident where many people were killed while they were on mid-flight. Now after that, this Khalistan issue, over a period of time, as in India, because of the law enforcement security agencies and their actions, as well as popular support waned in India in favor of Khalistan. So it really died down, or it went under the radar, and it died down in India, and it became under the surface, under the radar in Canada also. But in the last few years, what happened was, with the Trudeau government coming to power, it was noticed that these pro-Khalistan elements again were active, because Trudeau himself, and not so much his party as well, has been a big. The pro-Khalistan groups are seen as his support base, his vote base. So although out of 20 lakh Indian diaspora in Canada, people of Indian origin, about 8 lakh, ballpark, about 8 lakh are Sikhs. Out of that 8 lakh, only 1% are Sikh radicals. So we are talking of about 8,000 to 9,000 people. It's a minuscule minority if you compare them with the 20 lakh, Indian people of Indian origin in Canada. So, but these 8,000, 9,000 people have a huge nuisance value. So, and they control about 10 to 15 gurdwaras, which are very radical. They mobilize funds. They also mobilize politically for the local candidates in the local council, city council, or county kind of an election. Also, they fund these candidates. So there's a lot of political mobilization that they can do, these 8,000, 9,000 people, and they do that very effectively and they're concentrated in couple of places in British Columbia and in Ontario. So these pockets, these almost like very densely populated pockets where they have this political might, they influence almost, people say 10 to 20, 25 seats. They have a swing factor. So Trudeau has always quoted this vote base, Trudeau's party as well. So now that they're in power, they're very emboldened. So we have seen the Sikh referendum, for Khalistan happening in the recent years, which is also a brainchild of the Pakistan, of Pakistan's ISI. So which has been done in other countries where there is Sikh population, Sikh diaspora as well, US, Australia, Germany, UK as well. Now, but in Canada, because the numbers are relatively larger than the other countries, so it has got traction, and because the political establishment has looked the other way, or kind of have encouraged them or not done anything against them, so the secessionist movement in Canada has been seen as freedom of speech, and it's a social movement. They don't see it as a secessionist movement. So that has been the that has been the pain point or irritant between India and Canada so far. So there have been situation where Indian embassies have been attacked. There have been protests against Indian embassies. There have been, protests where killers of Indira Gandhi, assassins of Indira Gandhi, they have been eulogized. Their cutouts have been paraded. And most recently, a very important, a very unprecedented thing happened where these groups, they published posters of Indian High Commissioner in Indian Consul General, basically Indian diplomats based in Canada, posted in Canada, and they put out their posters as killers of Nijjar, this Hardeep Singh Nijjar. So that really, so over the years, in the last few years, these activities, each time there has been such activity, India has protested, India has called the Canadian High Commissioner, Canadian diplomats, summoned them, registered their protest, lodged their protest, but no action has been taken against these groups or these individuals which are doing this thing. So Jagmeet Singh is sort of heads the party NDP, which supports is part of the ruling coalition for with Trudeau's government. Now Trudeau's party, the Liberal Party, doesn't have the numbers on its side, so it needs Jagmeet's party's NDP's support to survive as a government. So Jagmeet, although he has some 20 plus seats, 29 seats I think, so they have now, and Trudeau is 20 seats short, so he gets that number through Jagmeet's party and is beholden to Jagmeet, let's put it this way. And because so Jagmeet has a influence on Trudeau, on Trudeau's government, which and Jagmeet Singh is seen as a much more pro-Khalistan. In Indian establishment, the most charitable view of him is a Khalistan sympathizer. The more hawkish view is that he's a Khalistan activist. So he can be placed anywhere in between. So he's because of him, Trudeau is said to be much more pro-Khalistan than he was otherwise. So Jagmeet Singh is sort of heads the party NDP, which supports is part of the ruling coalition for with Trudeau's government. Now Trudeau's party, the Liberal Party, doesn't have the numbers on its side, so it needs Jagmeet's party's NDP's support to survive as a government. So Jagmeet, although he has some 20 plus seats, 29 seats I think, so they have now, and Trudeau is 20 seats short, so he gets that number through Jagmeet's party and is beholden to Jagmeet, let's put it this way. And because so Jagmeet has a influence on Trudeau, on Trudeau's government, which and Jagmeet Singh is seen as a much more pro-Khalistan. In Indian establishment, the most charitable view of him is a Khalistan sympathizer. The more hawkish view is that he's a Khalistan activist. So he can be placed anywhere in between. So he's because of him, Trudeau is said to be much more pro-Khalistan than he was otherwise. But anyways, he's also quoting that base as well for himself, for his party, because he also wants those votes to be transferred to him. So that's why we see a much higher escalation in terms of the rhetoric from Trudeau politically. And in Canada, there is a very interesting thing that Canada, because it's been home to immigration and immigrant policies, because of its open immigration policy, it is often seen to be hostage to immigrant interests. So their foreign policy is shaped by immigrants' interests as well. So, for example, the Russia policy is shaped by the Russian and the Ukrainian refugees and asylum seekers. Similarly, the Chinese refugees or political asylum seekers from Hong Kong or Taiwan or mainland China also shape some of Canada's foreign policy. Same holds true for their Israel policy, where Jews have a say. Sri Lanka policy. During the LTT war, a lot of Sri Lankans had gone to Canada, so they shaped Canada's Sri Lanka policy. So the same thing has happened with their India policy, where these pro-Khalistan elements have had a veto, or they shape the policy of the Canadian government. So that has become an issue, and Indian government sees this as a challenge, as a problem when dealing with a more pro-Khalistan friendly government in Ottawa. So Trudeau administration is seen as a much more pro-Khalistan administration. So there are two layers to it. First is the bilateral relationship between India and Canada. So, as I told you, the large diaspora, almost about 3 lakh students studying there. So there are people who have taken loans and gone there. So if right now Canadian High Commission has said that they are not going to stop visa services. But because India has given an advisory, people might be hesitant to send their kids. So if travel becomes a challenge, then Indians will suffer. Indians who have to go there will suffer, because a lot of people have families there. Almost everyone in North India at least has an uncle or a cousin or relative in Canada. So that becomes a challenge. Similarly, Canadian passport holders, if there are second generation, third generation Canadian passport, Indian origin people who want to come and who don't have a visa now, by some chance, so they will find it difficult to come here. So also, when in a society, you might be an Indian of Indian origin, but you get married to a Canadian there. Your Canadian in-laws or family, if they want to travel to India for a wedding, for example, which usually happens, so they will be impacted. Similarly, there are people, Indians who spend, because of the family connections, if they have a son there or a daughter who lives there in Canada, and the old parents are here, so they usually spend the summer months there, and winter months they come back and spend in India, because winter is very cold there, so they are called snowbirds. So they come back to India. So if there are restrictions, then their movement becomes because the people to people connect is so strong, is so robust, because of such a large diaspora. Any impact between the two sides, any political relationship deteriorating, has a direct impact on the visa relationship and the visa issues, and that services, if it's broken, if it's impacted, that affects people the most. So people will suffer the most. Secondly, the business relationship, economic relationship, is actually only about $11 billion of trade, bilateral trade. But Indians eat so much of dal, pulses, and masoor ki dal, but we don't produce as much. So we import, one of the major importer source of imports is Canada, and Canada, if relationship again breaks down, so then your imports of dal, pulses will suffer, and that might lead to a price rise, or suddenly a demand supply gap. So there are ways that, and also Canada has over the years made large investments in India. So for example, Canada's investments have been in, from Paytm, Zomato to large number of startups. For example, the one of the major products that Canada sells here is this McCain, that frozen foods which you and I eat in these nuggets, so those, if they get impacted, if there are tariff barriers that come up, then they will face challenges in not getting them. Canada is one of the biggest shareholders in the new shiny Bangalore airport, Kempegowda International Airport. So so these things, these relationships, when they rupture, then companies go slow on investments. So that will again get impacted. So future investments will get impacted. So if business travelers can't come, then again business gets impacted. So in those ways, India Canada bilateral relations will suffer, will impact the trade as well as the people to people contact. So it's part of the G7 grouping, and it's also part of the Five Eyes grouping, where it shares intelligence. So in these two groupings, it sits with US, UK, France, Germany, and all these countries, Australia, New Zealand. Some are in G7, some are in the Five Eyes group, and they share intelligence. So they are actually a very long time close ally of the Western democracies, Western countries like US, UK. So they have very strong strategic alignment. They're allies, and India is now the new growing strategic partnership with US, UK, France, Australia. So they would not want to take sides in this kind of a diplomatic fight between India and Canada. These countries will find themselves in a difficult situation. So they would definitely want the relationship to not deteriorate to a level where it becomes irreversible. So right now, I think the both sides have diplomatically, they are at an escalatory phase where they're taking actions or making statements which are sort of very high in rhetoric. So that is where the geopolitical situation is, where these countries need India, and India also needs the support of these countries. So in fact, India's statement of looking into any specific evidence or information came after US made the statement that it should cooperate. It urged India to cooperate in Canada's investigation. So there is sort of some movement that's happening where these countries are going to help each other so that Canada and India's relationship don't deteriorate much further.